Severnaya Part 1, The Surface. My favorite GoldenEye level. I have not played this only until recently, for about 20 years. Thinking back, it's late 97, we're playing this with friends. What makes this level so special, so memorable, thinking back about those days? And I spent a considerable amount of time thinking about it, and I think the most interesting thing, and possibly the only reason that maybe this level sticks out so much, is the winter atmosphere and what was happening, at least in my neck of the woods, in the 1996-1997 time frame. In 96, we had a blizzard, and in 94, we had a blizzard, and in 93, we had the quote-unquote perfect storm in the Northeast. So in late August 97, by the time GoldenEye finally releases, roughly 2 years after the film, we're fresh off the heels of a chain of blizzards in the Northeast. So playing this as a kid, we're totally buried in snow several winters in a row with extremely high averages of snowfall amounts, and being in some more rural areas, this kind of navigating a snow-covered landscape and with paths through the snow and just everything being kind of difficult to walk in the snow and blowing snow, obscuring your vision. These are all really memorable things from a kind of a nostalgia perspective, right? So this level in and of itself is very simple. Obviously, it's, to anyone who's played it before, it's kind of like a sandbox. It's one of the most, I would say, potentially boring level designs. It's kind of a circle, basically. And there's not much going on other than this barren, snow-covered landscape with kind of an odd-looking, ominous skybox design here with some blues and some pinks and reds. Another thing I would say is peculiar and memorable about the level are the enemy placements. Now, for the recording purposes here, we're looking at the regular agent or easy difficulty level, and I did this for a reason. A couple of reasons. Primarily being your enemies are much less aggressive on agent, and I wanted a nice, slow, steady look at the level here. On 00, you have enemies who know where you are and just sprint towards you, regardless of whether or not you're making contact with the enemy or have been, triggering an alert or, were seen by a camera or anything. They just seem to know where you're at, and they're coming after you constantly. On agent, also, it kind of is more realistic in a sense, right? So if you're navigating this area secretly, you're not going to have guys who just know automatically where you are and sprint towards you in snow gear. This is just totally unrealistic. I think on agent, your troop placements, you have a couple guards casually walking around. I think they're called Arctic commandos, right? They're just walking around, kind of patrolling. Most of the guys are in the cabin areas and undercover, shielding themselves from what could probably be called extreme cold in this Severnaya, which my research suggested means north in Russian. So we're talking about, Siberia here or whatever. It's more realistic. And this also would be probably the way if you were a kid playing this game, you just selected agent. You didn't really want that cranked up max difficulty. You wanted to enjoy the game and just kind of sit down and play it. So this is how you would have kind of experienced it, not knowing the layout of the levels. And to be totally frank, after 20 years plus of time off, I was very rusty. And playing this for the first time, I started a file on 00. Wow, I mean, that was a pretty jarring experience. And for anyone out there who's in a similar boat, you haven't played this for 20 years, maybe you haven't played it for 25 years, right? I would maybe just go with the Xbox version if you have it. If you're somehow crafty enough to have the Xbox Live Arcade version, which I don't want to get into here, have at it. But from my experiences, the Xbox version, you could just kind of sit down, and the controls, that's what I'm getting at here. Graphics, glitches here, you'll see a couple, some edges of texture mapping are not cooperating. I don't get stuck on that. It's a sticking point that I have heard about, and I've seen some other YouTube videos, people highlighting these graphical anomalies, which are a bit annoying. However, I don't really see it taking away from the game that much. I just want to get back here in this slightly improved, crisper kind of look, and just enjoy it. So if you look back in the level design, we often see these kind of oddly placed boxes, items just kind of laying around. You know, by today's standards, these are, I don't really know, how would we describe it? Just kind of useless clutter. These barrels obviously would explode, and different things. I guess everything in this game technically explodes, right, if you shoot it enough. I watched the Golden Era documentary. I was tipped off by someone who commented on my prior video that, you know, there's a great documentary. I highly recommend it. I actually went out and purchased it because I just want to support everyone involved who created this game, the original version of this game, and I feel like they should have been included in this version in any capacity whatsoever, and my understanding is that they did not. Anyway, the objects placed around this level are an interesting point. Back in the 90s, if you were a kid growing up, you're going to find even these things now that look like clutter. You could call them, you know, poorly placed objects that have no meaning. Back then, the world of 3D environments was new, and object placement was kind of a novelty. We have objects in the world that we can interact with, and that's a big deal. You know, even in this game, they go one level farther. You can, you know, use them as cover and hide from enemy fire. So that's a huge deal. So, you know, looking from today's standards, somebody who's never played this game and maybe they're on the younger side and just jump right into it, they're seeing it for the first time. And, you know, you go into these cabins, some of them are empty, right? But you'll see some things laying around kind of sporadically. And, you know, someone could critique that pretty hard and say, what is this? But at the time, it was quite a novelty. And also the music. This is my favorite music from maybe any video game at all, and it really just kind of serves this kind of vacant, ominous atmosphere, which I think the level is more focused on the atmosphere, right? You have this giant satellite dish, and you know, kind of a military installation, but a very odd one if it is a military installation. Just who would have just a couple cabins, right? But that doesn't really paint the whole picture. So we have the music to kind of fill in that gap, and I think it's just expertly done. I can't say enough about the soundtrack for this game as a whole. And I believe Grant Kirkhope and Graham Norgate, both of them together, composed, I think, 50% each of this game. And I believe it was Norgate who did Surface 1 here, and Kirkhope did Surface 2, if I'm not mistaken. I'm sure if I am, anybody will correct me here. But so going back at it, I think, again, from a level design perspective, you don't really have a lot going on here, particularly on Agent. Like I said, on 00, you're going to have guys just sporadically charging you with sniper rifles in snow gear, fully decked out Arctic snow gear. You know, think, you know, John Carpenter's The Thing level of snow gear, which would be extremely prohibitive for moving around, especially at speed, carrying a firearm. These things aren't going to happen. But of course, you will have other Spetsnaz commandos in the higher difficulty that come at you, and they're very difficult if you allow yourself to get surrounded. You'll see at times where they, even on regular Agent here, they just know where you're at some point in the level. I think it might be triggered on picking up the key. So once you get the key, they just kind of keep spawning. I don't know if it's picking up the key or killing that official in the cabin, that triggers it, but it does appear to happen after you interact with the key. So that being said, outside of the awkwardness of kind of being pursued here relentlessly, depending upon what scenario you're in, this level's kind of vacant landscape in another setting, in another kind of maybe musical soundtrack, or basically any other combination, I think this level would just be a failure. But I think in the unique way that everything was put together here, and maybe even the timeliness of the release, the novelty of a barren snow level with very sparsely placed objects and just a lot of wide open spaces and not a whole heck of a lot going on here, is just that much more memorable. It's just this striking experience that I think if you talk to anybody about GoldenEye, they're going to remember, the facility, and they might remember some of the bonus material, like the Egyptian level or something like that, or maybe Aztec, or some of the characters in multiplayer, throwing proximity mines. But if you kind of narrowed down and said, all right, well, what's your most memorable level, right? They're probably going to say facility or surface. You have some other contenders in there that could come up for a variety of reasons, but I think if you just look at the kind of wow factor, right, the setting in of that nostalgia when you start talking about this game, I really do think it's Surface 1. Surface 2, you do come back here again. The soundtrack is different. It's a much more ominous and arguably much more difficult level, particularly on 00. You are pursued. I mean, you have guys charging you every moment of the game, and it's just a fine balance of keeping them away from you and then taking out only the ones that you need to conserve ammo, and of course not getting hit. So you'll see, even on regular agent here, they just keep relentlessly pursuing you in a particularly unrealistic fashion. They just, the ground becomes littered with sniper rifles at some point here if you just kind of slow it down. And that's the point of this video. I just wanted to slow it down, and instead of blasting through, a lot of the content out there now is a lot of speed running and how quickly you can unlock these achievements and get the cheats unlocked and things of that nature. So and even something as basic as this rectangular structure here with the satellite dish on top, there's just enough detail to make it work without getting too overbearing and obnoxious, right? So we have all the bells and whistles that we need to understand that this is a functioning satellite dish, some kind of communications facility, and that's all we really need to know. Having watched again the Golden Era documentary, it sounded like there was a lot of unused artwork. At some point, they had the original Rare team, the Doke team, had to kind of just say, all right, we got to roll with what we have. And a lot of this artwork was just kind of lost to time. I guess somebody still has it, and was hoping that maybe some kind of future collaboration would produce that, but it sounds like they were not allowed to participate in the remastering of this particular game, which is very unfortunate. And it just kind of goes to show you that this really is potentially just a standout kind of example of how things used to be, and we might not, for a variety of reasons, have the opportunity to kind of revisit what these games could have been, because it seems like the powers that be don't want them included. So anyway, we just have a really interesting level here. For a couple reasons, this level should not work. A barren landscape generally is never a memorable level. Even in some of your more arguably popular games, right? Think of Ocarina of Time. I don't think of anyone who really likes the Gerudo Valley, in my experiences, and the whole sand ordeal going to the Spirit Temple, this wasteland with very low visibility. It doesn't stand out as a memorable thing that you want to talk about when you think about going back and enjoying these games and reliving them and trying to recall the memories that you have of your favorite levels and things of that nature. A barren landscape is just not something that comes up. And I think one of the coolest things they did, so if you start with a barren landscape, right? I keep driving on this point, but it makes sense. And you have a perimeter of trees here, almost like a fence keeping you in. You have impenetrable trees. You're naturally going to look for, is there a break in the tree line, right? And this is like another kind of nostalgia thing. If you're growing up back when all these blizzards were happening every year, particularly around my birthday, right? There would always be some kind of blizzard event, and having this game feature a level that kind of looked almost like home, there's not, a observatory or satellite dish in my hometown, but the constantly and very reliably snow-covered landscape, at least back then. Things aren't that way anymore, but a reliable winter, and being able to kind of experience that in a game in a more realistic way. We had snow instances in things like Majora's Mask and other games, and even Mario 64 with the snow level, but these were all kind of like a fantasy world, and this just had one layer more of realism. And you might not have these like kind of secret areas, but when you tuck back around behind the communications tower, and this little kind of smaller area opens up, and you have some additional little cabins or bunkers with security, and you see that camera kind of aiming at you with the alarm switch. And it's very hard to kind of communicate how impressive that was in 1997. Again, for all intents and purposes, this game was the first for so many things. It's almost impossible to kind of write down everything. Again, in the Golden Era documentary, they hit on this point pretty hard, but suffice it to say, almost every kind of first-person shooter type thing first happened in this game and kind of set the precedent. So there's just so many cool things about this game, and again, a level that otherwise should have failed, should not have been as memorable. I mean, everywhere you look, there's some sort of a BMW sedan model in one of these bunkers where the library books are, the archives here hidden away, next to, I think, an unused model for a dirt bike that was supposed to be used in the runway level, I think. Not too sure on that, but yeah, a level that otherwise should have been really a flop. I mean, let's think about it here. There's not much going on. Bunkers, snow, nothing. And somehow, for me, this comes back easily as number one. And I know there's others out there. I've read through many different videos and comment sections, and even personal, friends and stuff like that. This is always top two. Maybe top three, but generally top two experiences. You have your multiplayer, you have Facility, and Surface 1. I guess Surface 2, maybe Surface in general, right? Because you do come here again. So let's just call it the Surface. The Surface is I think, a top three memorable experience. It doesn't get, I think, enough official credit. Everybody always talks about Facility. That is a very sophisticated and deserving, title to have the most memorable level as being Facility. I think it deserves it. There's so many different aspects of that level, but from kind of a bare bones essentials, what makes this game work, right? An interesting level design and a great soundtrack. And that's all we have here. We have an interesting level design and a great soundtrack. And quite possibly one of the coolest things ever, still remembering the first time I saw this back in the 90s, being able to shoot the locks off of this ventilation shaft here and dropping down in to begin the next level. Back then, of course, you're kind of, maybe you're a little shook up and you're running from enemies, so you're climbing that ladder under enemy fire, and maybe you take a glance back, see how many guys are there, quick, panic shoot the locks off and drop down. One of the most memorable experiences, if not the most memorable experience from this entire game for me. So anyway, in a nutshell, excellent level design, amazing soundtrack, perfectly blended together. That makes Surface Severnaya Part 1 the most memorable Bond level for me and many people that I know. So again, this is Retro Renovo. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Hit the like, hit subscribe if you want to. Let me know your feedback. And we like to keep these coming here. And I'm trying to do some more polls and cover some more topics that might be interesting to you guys. So until next time, thanks again.